One of the most common challenges that's causing people a lot of heartache, whether they realize it or not, is that they're fundamentally not in tune with the world around them. And they live in a kind of limbo in which actual resonance with the unfolding reality is simply not occurring, or that there's a lot of dissonance in between that connection between the person and the unfolding of what's occurring. This fundamentally leads to and is the result of disconnection and disassociation. And if there's one thing that humans have perpetually sought over the millennia, is to move into connection, move into resonance with not only the world around them, but the greater total reality, as well as the deeper layers of their being. This is why many traditions around the world exist, specifically to perform this action, to help people reconnect, reattune, to come into resonance with these more expanded forces beyond just what's occurring in people's minds and in this sense of separation that they perpetually have. Now, the issue is that this is a challenge that has been a part of humanity since humanity has been known for what it is. So, a long time. Tens of thousands of years likely, and we know that even people living in indigenous and traditional settings in nature still experience levels of disconnection, of disassociation, and that they require certain kinds of work to help them retune and to reconnect to certain kinds of information flows that they're currently not connected to. So purpose for ritual, for ceremony, etc. And in today's world, the situation is way more drastic even. There's a lot more disconnection and disassociation happening on so many levels that in some ways it's heartbreaking, because many of us are being disconnected from the very thing that gives life its juiciness, its meaning, its vitality, which is to be able to come into resonance with these expanded forces. Now, by expanded forces, I'm talking about a few things. One is the environment itself. And for us to come into resonance with the environment, and when I mean environment, I'm not necessarily talking about the grand, arcing, global sphere of environment, the way that that word is often used today. And I'm not talking about global warming or whatever, any of that stuff. Talking about what's going on around you. Simple. I mean, sitting in a chair, feeling the fan, the subtle sensations of wind caressing your skin, feeling the water flowing over your body and all the thousands of little droplets that move in all these various arcs when you're taking a shower. Simple, right? Just this expansion out and connection with your environment that pulls you, in a sense, outside of your limited self because it attunes you to the world. But also, I'm talking about your own consciousness and the space inside of you as well, the environment within. Now, most people, they are simply existing in a state of mental discourse in today's world because there's a huge disassociation to the body inside of modern culture. And there's a lot of reinforcement to push people into this perpetual thinking mind. And there's nothing wrong with that mind. It's useful and it has its value and its use and its uses. Yeah, it's useful. But that is not reality as a whole. That's one little snippet of our interpreting abilities, of our ability to create discourse about what's occurring, not necessarily what's actually occurring. And there's a lot of powers at B currently that are deploying a lot of resources that are both institutional, think big institutions, as well as rich people with a lot of money, who are invested and are investing lots of energy into keeping people in that mode, and then from that mode already drawing them into virtual realities on a phone, on a computer, on a video game set, whatever the case may be. So this problem is being compounded now. This normal state that humans get in of being disconnected and disassociated is being massively compounded in today's world, even more so. So we're actually not in tune with what's occurring at this broader level. And that leaves us contracted. It leaves us stuck. It leaves us in these perpetual loops that occur inside the thinking mind. And those loops create behavior patterns, which keep people perpetually stuck in the same kinds of behaviors over and over and over again. This is why many of the great traditions from the East that put a lot of emphasis on presence and being in tune with the present moment talk about developing spontaneity, that is, the ability to act in the moment from a place that is spontaneous and not habituated and conditioned. Because as soon as you start to fully come into resonance with the present moment, which requires you to be in tune with what's occurring around you or within you in that moment, you start to break out of habituated loops, which can only exist in something that is out of tune with the moment. Because for you to come into the moment is to dissolve the past and the future and to collapse everything into the now. And that breaks up these habituated loops. But more so, what I want to talk to you about today is bringing the body in tune with the world so that it can resonate with it, both the external world and the internal world. Now, one of the best metaphors that I've ever heard for describing the body is a lot like a stringed instrument. And realistically, it's actually not that far off from the truth. Now, in Vedic traditions, the word for the channels that move throughout the body are called nadis. And nadi can be translated as a kind of sound channel, meaning that they are vibrating at particular frequencies. Now, if you know anything about instruments and music, you know that if an instrument is perfectly tuned, like a stringed instrument, and someone sets off another instrument, that the perfectly tuned instrument's string will start to vibrate, because that frequency is able to arrive so cleanly that you just have this resonance that's occurring. And in some ways, that's really similar to what happens when people are in tune with their environment, is that the five senses of sight, hearing, taste, smell, touch are so tuned that they can actually be set off with almost nothing to vibrate by the environment. So that means that the subtlest of things can light us up and create these intense tremoring vibrations inside the nervous system. Now, this is a state that's referred to in certain traditions, especially as I've been exposed to it, like Shaivite Tantra, which I'm still a novice in studying, but they talk about being in a state in which the subtlest of things can create these ecstatic ripples inside of our nervous system. And we're talking about a slight ripple of water across the surface of a pond. Or, as I was talking about earlier, a slight caress of the wind. Or the dripping of a faucet. All of these tiny little things can create these big responses because you go through the work of attuning your senses to the environment on a consistent basis through the practice of paying attention for small periods of time. So this is one of the ways to do it, is to pick a sensation, whatever that may be, of any of the five senses, and then just pay attention to it for 10, 15, 20 seconds at a time. No big deal. And try to be as fully present as you can with it without creating tension inside your system, and then seeing what happens, or listening to what happens, or feeling what happens, or smelling what happens, or tasting what happens, with no expectation, just being fully present. And what you'll notice is that over time, your senses start to get attuned to the environment, and the world really becomes such a richer place as a result of that. And you start to enter into your life more and more and more. Or conversely, learning to pay attention to what's occurring inside of us without trying to modify it. So picking a sensation, easily we can start with the breath or with the heartbeat, and just being with it for 10 to 20 seconds without trying to modify them, without trying to change them. Or even if you have intense emotions, which are in this way actually fuel for this process, you just pay attention to the edges of the emotion, to its qualities, for example, whether it's hot, whether it's cold, whether it's feeling as if it's large or small, whether it's moving, whether it's static and stagnant, all of these kinds of energetic qualities, the same way you might feel outside, you can actually feel inside too. And just being with it for 10 to 20 seconds at a time. And now you start to do this over and over and over again throughout the day, 10 times a day, 20 times a day, 30 times a day, more even. Which, again, we're talking 10 to 20 seconds. If you did it 100 times, you might, be at like 15, 20 minutes a day or something like that, right? It's not that big of a deal. Though I do suggest starting small, 10 times a day, just being present for 10 to 20 seconds. And this starts to tune the senses to the environment so that they can resonate. Now, another way to do this is to begin to de-armor the body. And I've talked about de-armoring in a lot of different places, but for those of you who don't know, armor is habituated muscular tension, typically deep muscular tension, so not superficial muscular tension, that has some kind of emotional component connected to it. And it typically occurs in a pattern. So meaning that there is a kind of global pattern in the system that is interconnected to some degree or another and creates a kind of emotional ecosystem inside of you that is the result of some past event. So the reason this matters is because if the body is the instrument and we are armored, then listen to the word armor. What does that conjure for you? Typically some kind of hard, rigid structure. And this is the same. By what I mean is that there's a rigid, hardened structure stuck in the past that is affecting your decisions now. And we're all still armored to some degree or another. This is going to be the case even if we do work to de-armor. It's a perpetual process. But if we're in that state, and again, a lot of us are, most of us are, then how are we supposed to come into contact with the present moment? Because we're hardened and rigid and stuck in some kind of a feeling state that originated in the past. So actually doing some work to unlock this muscular tension can help us to come back into tune with the environment around us and within us. So we can actually feel what we feel in the present moment and not just feel what's originating in the past. And one of the best ways to do this, in my opinion, is with the field of study called bioenergetics. And for those of you who don't have a source for that, my suggestion would be the work of Devraj Sandberg, which can be found on YouTube. Excellent work for de-armoring the body. And in that case, I actually have a guided study path in my Substack, which can be found linked below. If you want to explore a way to approach bioenergetics that is structured and can give you an entry point, a doorway into the practice. And now I'm going to give you one more methodology that is really potent for helping you do this, which is getting into flow state in nature on a regular basis. Now, if you don't have access to beautiful nature, then just getting into flow on its own can do that. So there's been a lot of talk in the recent years about flow state. And flow state is this state of consciousness that is a merging kind of consciousness. We can talk about it as getting in the zone. Athletes, that's how they kind of refer to it, because they refer to the zone as their place of peak performance, because when you're in flow, you're fully present. And the object, meaning the object, stuff outside of us, like this camera, this microphone, etc., and the subject, the being inside, that dichotomy dissolves in flow. And you are fully embodied in flow, especially if you're doing something physical. But typically, flow has a kind of embodying sensation to it. And it is a way to merge into the present moment and to dissolve that sense of boundary between us and them. In fact, if you've ever been at a concert and gotten into deep resonance with what was occurring, along with everybody else, you were in a state of group flow in which everybody was resonating and connecting to the same frequency and being fully in the now, in that present moment, creating an amplitude effect because of everybody connecting together. So really cool stuff. But allowing yourself to get into flow in some form or fashion is one of the most potent tools we have to directly move us into the present moment, because flow by its very nature engages us and requires us to be in the present moment. Otherwise, you're not in flow. And doing it in nature is because nature is a very rich place that will, by its very nature, draw you in to the present moment. This is the case. If you spend 2 or 3 hours in nature, your thinking mind starts to go away, and you start to be drawn into what's occurring around you on your own. Like, you don't have to try to even force it. It's a beautiful thing. So when you can connect being in flow with being in nature, the effect is profound, and it begins to tune you to the present moment. Now, this can happen in a lot of different ways. So you could go surfing, you could go hiking, you could go swimming. You can just go out and sit and allow your senses to begin to attune to what's occurring around you, and watching and listening and tasting and smelling and feeling and all those things. And then that process, those 3 things, just these micro practices of paying attention in subtle, small ways, of doing bioenergetic work, of de-armoring work. It doesn't have to be bioenergetics. If you have some other reliable method to de-armor, that works, but some kind of de-armoring. And then getting into flow state, especially in nature, is a way to begin to tune the instrument of the human body to what's occurring, to these larger flows of information that are around us, and brings you back into your life, brings you back into feeling state, brings you back into sensation, into actually being here and now. And this is what most people want. I can promise you that doing this on a consistent basis creates such a different lived experience than not doing it on a regular basis. Just to give you that very clear kind of dichotomy or polarization, this on and off set of things, black and white, really. There's a big, major difference in the two. And if you want a life that's more vital, that's more present, that's more embodied, then that's what we kind of have to do, is find ways to start to reattune the body like an instrument to the environment and to what's happening inside of us, and to come more deeply into the now. All right, my friends, if you've appreciated this and are interested in what I'm talking about, come check me out at eatingancientvirtue.com or eatingancientvirtue.substack.com. If you go to either one, you'll find my work. And in those places, I have courses that go into how to do these kinds of things and more. because eating ancient virtue, this idea of taking in the past in order to nourish the future, is a very broad topic. And sometimes, to my dismay, it's so broad because everybody's like, hey, pick a niche and target these people. And I'm just like, oh, I can't do that. That's not what the work is. So anyway, if you like this, come check me out. Thanks for listening. Be well, my friends.